You're listening to the Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast. Today's episode is about the slow game, how toxic grandparents chip away at your children slowly over time. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives with Toxic In-Laws podcast is your sanctuary for navigating the sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Hi, I'm Miriam Susan. Thank you so much for joining me in this series that I've been doing in the month of May, all about toxic grandparents. And in the episode last week from May 9th, I talk about just what the definition is of toxic. Because it's such a trendy word today that I want to make sure that we're on the same page, especially if you're new here, especially if you haven't been following me for the last 120 some episodes, that you know that I am not using the word toxic lightly. I'm not using it as, I know a lot of people do today. I'm using it in a more solid way that just really describes a pattern of behavior that really is like a poison or like a cancer in our families. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. And the scripture reference for today comes from the book of Sirach. And I know, especially for my husband, this book has quite a few scriptures that are very triggering for him. But we're not going to get into that today because there's so much else to talk about, and I have mentioned it in other podcasts. So today's verse is from the New Revised Standard Version, Catholic Edition, and it is from the book of Sirach, chapter 27, verse 11. And it says, "The conversation of the godly is always wise, but the fool changes like the moon." Now, the situation with toxic grandparents does not happen all at once. Most of the time, it's a comment here, a story about you that paints you in a way that's slightly wrong, maybe not completely wrong, but there's like a little twist on it that's not entirely true. And then one day you realize that your children are looking at you differently. And you can't quite pinpoint when it started. So today we're going to talk about this long game and what it actually looks like. And as someone who, pretty recently in my marriage went no contact with my in-laws. And for 23 years, I and my husband together did not drag the children into this drama that we were going through with his parents. I have kind of sideline experience with this long game. And it's a game that I did not even know I was playing. And this is how it tends to start. And this is how it started for us. It was slowly and almost invisible, because I didn't really see it. Because a toxic grandparent who wants to maintain a position of influence in your children's lives doesn't usually make dramatic moves. They make small, consistent ones. My husband likes to talk about how his mom works and how she tends to plan things out, seemingly, is that like he's playing a game of chess with her. And I am not a chess player. I have tried to learn how to play the game chess. But for me, the strategy, the thinking, 5, 6, 7 moves ahead, that's just not how my brain naturally works. But my husband grew up with this. And so he is very familiar with this. Let me move this pawn here, because in 5 or 6 moves, I'm going to take your queen. That's how he sees how his mom especially thinks and lives and does things. And so your toxic in-laws, if they're grandparents, tend to make these small little micro moves that chances are you don't even really notice, or they're very easy to play off. And, you see your kids experience this when your in-laws make a big sigh whenever your name comes up, and maybe an eye roll, maybe a smirk, and a comment that's like, well, at our house, we do it this way. And each moment, each move seems minor. A while back, I did an episode about 1,000 paper cuts, death by paper cuts, and this is the same thing. So each move is very minor, just like one paper cut is not a big deal, but the accumulation of all these little moves, the accumulation of 1,000 paper cuts, 1,000,000 paper cuts over time, that accumulation is not a minor deal. So here's the part that makes it so hard to name and even to explain to others, sometimes even to our husbands, is that when you describe what happens, it sounds like nothing. Your mom sighed when I said something. She rolled her eyes. That doesn't sound like a crisis. It doesn't sound like something that needs to, have action like right now. But the pattern is what we're looking at here. The pattern is something that we need to pay attention to. And so one thing that I want to ask you is, have you ever noticed a shift in your child's behavior or your child's attitude after they've spent time with their grandparents? And then reflecting back on it, you just kind of told yourself, that you're just imagining it. Like, I'm just trying to see things that aren't really there, because maybe you have some resentment, you have some bitterness, you have some anger towards your in-laws, and then you kind of lump all that together and say, well, okay, I'm just imagining things, I'm just projecting my anger, my frustration, whatever, onto my children. But that might not be the case. Yes, it might be the case. There might be times when you do take whatever baggage you have in your brain, in your mind, from your experiences with your in-laws, and then kind of project it on your kids, and then they kind of react to that. But what if that's not always the case? And chances are it's probably not always the case. Yes, it can be the case some of the times, but it might not always be the case. So this is where the wedge comes in. And I'm going to call it the loyalty wedge. And what's being built over time, slowly, with these micro movements, these small moves on this chessboard that is your life and your relationship with your children, is a very quiet loyalty split, where the grandparents become the fun and understanding ones, and you become the enforcers of rules that the children don't like. And the thing is that your children aren't directly being told not to trust you. It'd be very unusual for toxic grandparents to come out and say that. Does it happen? Yes. But we're talking about the more kind of covert toxicity, because this is the long game. And so your children are not going to be told by their grandparents not to trust you, but they're being put in the position to not trust you because of these little small micro movements, these little tiny paper cuts. And this is very insidious, because it's more insidious than directly undermining your authority, because it's harder to name and it's very, very hard to confront. So you confront your in-laws about your mother-in-law rolling her eyes at you. So what? I mean, if you take a step back and you think about that, if somebody came up to you and said, well, I think that your behavior towards me is toxic because you roll your eyes every time my name comes up. So get over it. But what is happening is that your child is being weaponized against you. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a slow redirection, because children love unconditionally, naturally. Like, that is just something innate, right? Even you hear of children who are from highly abusive backgrounds, highly abusive families. And you know what? They still love their mommy and daddy because that's how we are wired. It's a survival thing, right? That God gave us this innate, unconditional love for the people who are in authority in our lives. And so when our children are exposed to these little tiny things by an authority figure in their lives that kind of paint the primary authority figure in their lives in a negative light, it is a slow redirection from your kids being focused on your authority and seeking you out as the authority figure to seeking their grandparents out. And it can happen even when a grandparent genuinely, truly loves your children. Because manipulation and love are not mutually exclusive. We talked about this last week, or 2 weeks ago. A pattern of harm is still a pattern, even if the wrapping is affection. And again, I'm going to bring up my beautiful chart of a properly ordered Catholic family. What is happening when toxic in-laws play this long game is that they are slowly coming into this circle. Where are they? In-laws or parents. They're slowly working their way into this circle to be in this spot, or maybe the God spot, maybe your spouse spot, into this circle to be a person of influence over your children. And that's not a place of authority, of responsibility that they are naturally given. God designed the family for God to be at the center. You as your spouse, you and your spouse to be the second layer of influence after God for your children, and then the children come next. And when our in-laws, when our parents come in, it brings disorder to our families. So remember, we have to keep this in mind, that a properly ordered Catholic family is God first, our spouse second, and our children third in the level of importance. And when we have these outside influences coming in, even if it's from loving grandparents, genuinely loving grandparents, they get put in a place of authority over our children that is not theirs to claim. When they insert themselves as being the authority over us, that is not their role to claim. In a healthy relationship, again, we've talked about this before, that yes, there are instances where grandparents do have that position of authority because of whatever, because of, a death, because of a divorce, because of a separation, because of abuse, whatever. But I'm talking about a healthy Catholic family where mom and dad are still married, they're raising their own children, they have a center focus on God, and yet we have these outside influences trying to come in and disrupt the order that God created for our families. So, how do you name it? How do you name what is happening? Well, you don't have to have all of the answers to start paying attention right now. And part of what the purpose of this series is to help you see the patterns that are likely going on in your life with your in-laws or your parents and your children, so that you can start to see the patterns and stop dismissing these things that are happening as nothing. I don't want you to end up like I did and be 20-something years into this process and then realize, oh my goodness, my mother-in-law is standing there in my kitchen directly undermining my authority to my daughters. I don't want that for you. Because then it's so confusing for the kids when you decide that you need to take a step back from contact, maybe just to heal, maybe just to regroup, to figure out what in the world is going on. And then you have these situations with your children who, again, genuinely love their grandparents, and they can't really understand why, because you've never said anything about, your in-laws or your parents being ugly towards you or to your spouse. And the children have just seen grandma and grandpa as, fun people to be around. And here you are being an enforcer of boundaries, and the kids are left going, well, what's going on? We always hang out with grandma and grandpa on Sunday, and now we're not. And then you look like the bad guy when all along this has been happening, and you played it off as nothing when it's not nothing. So these episodes are not necessarily about what to do. It's more about giving you the language to describe what you're already noticing, why you have that gut feeling, those butterflies in your stomach, that tension in your shoulders, the headaches that come when you're around your in-laws and you see how they're acting towards you in front of your children. I want you to have some recognition of that. I want you to see that so that you know what's going on. And then I want you to think about, what are all the things that you've been just explaining away for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years, like we did? What are those things? What are those behaviors? What are those eye rolls? What are those little jabs? What are those moments where grandma and grandpa step in and try to change plans that you've already set? What are those things that have been happening? Start to notice the patterns. Not because you want to have a laundry list of accusations and confront your in-laws about every single little thing. No, it's more to just recognize that there is something going on that is not good for your family. It doesn't have to be harmful. It doesn't have to be like super abusive. It doesn't have to be like something illegal that you need to, call social services on. But it can just be a subtle jab, a subtle comment, a subtle eye roll, a subtle facial expression that happens over and over again that your kids are picking up on, because our children, they are so smart. They are so smart, and they pick up on these little things. They pick up on how grandma said something ugly to mommy and now she feels bad. Or mommy said something that I didn't like, but grandma said something and kind of came to my defense. Mommy said I couldn't go play outside until I cleaned up my room. But grandma said, oh, come on, let's go outside. Let's go together and go play, sidewalk chalk outside. And so it's those subtle things that I want you to pay attention to, because it matters. And if you notice a pattern, that's when you start to really pay attention. Because if it's just a one-time thing, one time, maybe it was starting to get dark and your parents had bought, this beautiful set of sidewalk chalk for your kids, and it was getting late and their visit was going to end in the next few days, and those few days was going to be rainy and they weren't going to be able to, but they're like, oh, come on, let's just go outside and do sidewalk chalk. Okay, so that's a one-time thing. But if it happens over and over again, that's what you need to pay attention to. And that's when behavior starts to become toxic. So going back to Sirach, wisdom from God is consistent, but manipulation shifts and changes to serve its purpose. Just like the scripture said, the conversation of the godly is always wise, but the fool changes like the moon. The moon is always changing. It always has phases. Sometimes it's a full moon. Sometimes there's no light at all. Sometimes I call it the fingernail moon. It's just like the little crescent. It shifts. And so does manipulation to serve different purposes. So there's something that's very clarifying when you recognize this inconsistency as a pattern, rather than just kind of playing it off as a personality quirk, or, well, that's just how mom is. She's like that. She changes her mind. She forgets, whatever. That's why we need to start noticing things and seeing if there's a pattern. And when someone's behavior shifts If they're super sweet and loving one visit and then they're kind of cold and harsh the next visit, if they're super charming in public, maybe they're super charming when you're at mass together, but then you get like the subtle jabs and stuff when it's just you and your in-laws at home. That's not mood swings. It tends to be kind of a method of putting you into place and then inserting whoever that person is, whether it's your mother-in-law, father-in-law, mom, dad, grandmother, grandpa, whatever it is, inserting themselves into that position of authority over your children that's not theirs to claim. So if something in today's episode, the things that we talked about today gave you some kind of language to something that you've been feeling, then I want you to know that that matters, and I want you to hold on to that and pray about that and use your discernment to see, am I just seeing things that are not there? Am I making things up? Am I projecting some of my frustrations with my in-laws onto my kids? Be discerning. Write it down if you have to start to notice these patterns, because it's really easy to shrug off and to downplay these little things. I know, because I've done it. Did it for 23 years until my body couldn't handle it anymore. So take time to just think about that. And if this really resonated with you, I want to invite you to my community at toxicinlaws.com. It is a growing community of women who, they are seeing this too. They are going through this, and they want to be around other women who will pray for them, who will encourage them, who will validate them, and sometimes lovingly redirect if they're not, seeing things the right way, or perhaps need to take a step back and see things from a different perspective. I give tough love in the group and with my coaching clients. And if it's, something that perhaps they are seeing in a way that might not necessarily be accurate, I will gently correct it, because, it's not about bashing our in-laws. It's not. It's not about them, because we can't control our in-laws, right? We can't control the behaviors that they do, the way they talk about us. We cannot control that. But what we can control is our boundaries. We can control how we react to the things that they say and that they do. We can control the access level that they have to our children, not as like a jab against them, because they will try to pull that card. They will say that you are, using their grandchildren against them. And really, I really haven't come across that with the women that I've worked with. What I see is that, okay, they have an issue with grandparents, they have an issue with in-laws, and they're just going to pull back. And because the access level has changed, that's where the toxic in-laws, toxic grandparents come in and say, well, you're holding, your children against me. You're using my grandchildren against me. When really it's just, okay, well, I've noticed something and I don't like it. And now I need to step into my role, my vocation as a wife and as a mother, and protect my children from influences that I believe are not healthy. And those are the kind of women that are in my community. So this is your invitation. Consider this your open invitation to come to toxicinlaws.com and join this free community. There is a paid upgrade if you want access to deeper levels of training on legal protection, on how to maintain privacy in your family, how to deal with boundaries, how to handle holidays, how to have some self-care through all of this, and is all available to you at toxicinlaws.com. So I hope to see you inside. God bless you. Go in peace. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.